The late, great R.C. Sproul. It's called The Last Days According to Jesus. When did Jesus say he would return? So I love the premise of the book. It's R.C. Sproul saying, okay, if we're going to talk about the return of Jesus, who better as a source to go to than what did Jesus actually say? Now, when you get in the context of the book, he doesn't ignore what Paul says or talk about or ignore what the book of Revelation says, but that is the primary focus is the Olivet Discourse. And looking at the conundrum that we have, if we look at Jesus' words of that these things will happen before this generation passes away, kind of paraphrasing there, then we have to answer the critics of either this was wrong and Jesus was a false prophet, or not understanding the timing of what he's saying. And that's the defense that he goes into. So the position that R.C. Sproul takes is called partial preterism. And he will distinguish partial preterism from full preterism. As far as his millennial view, I believe he holds to postmillennialism. But overall, his interpretive hermeneutic of the eschatological discourses throughout the New Testament are within partial preterism. And so I'm going to read about 5 or so quotes from the book and then let you know my final thoughts on it as we get through this. So he relies heavily on Josephus to prove the point. So partial preterism is the understanding that the majority of what we're reading when Jesus talks about his return and judgment and all these things that are typically understood as future, particularly if you're far more familiar with the dispensational lens, a 7-year tribulation, a pre-tribulational rapture, and then a premillennial kingdom with Christ returning. That's generally what's taught in churches today, particularly here in the West, that this would be very different from what you're hearing, where it's very much futurist focus. Well, as a partial preterist, what R.C. Sproul holds to is the majority of those texts are talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and that judgment and the tribulation coming on the believers in the first century, which does not negate a final fulfillment, a final coming of Jesus in judgment. But what he's saying is the initial context of those passages is actually talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So let's get started. Here's his quote from Josephus. The Jewish historian Josephus states, "Of so great a multitude, not one escaped. Their destruction was caused by a false prophet, who had on that day proclaimed to those remaining in the city that God commanded them to go to the temple, there to receive the signs of their deliverance." Russell argues that the carcass where the eagles will be gathered refers to the guilty and devoted children of Israel who will be destroyed by the Roman legions. The carcass is Israel, and the eagles are Rome. So what he does here is he pulls an excerpt from the Jewish historian Josephus, who would have wrote about this time period and the destruction of Jerusalem, and he's lining it up with the description that we have in the Olivet Discourse, and then revisited again, in Matthew 24, and then revisited again the similar language in Revelation 19 about these birds of prey feasting on flesh, so forth. Okay. Then we also have this quote on page 140, also Josephus. So let me skip to that. In Josephus' record, the record of Jerusalem's fall indicates the radical fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy in the Olivet Discourse. As we have seen, preterists see this event not only the destruction of the temple and its attending circumstances, but also the parousia of Christ in his judgment coming. Radical preterists see in this event the fulfillment of all New Testament expectations of the return of Christ and for the last things of eschatology. But here we find sharp disagreement among preterists. Moderate preterists, such as those who hold to a postmillennial view of eschatology, insist that though the bulk of the Olivet Discourse was fulfilled in AD 70, there still remains a future coming or parousia of Christ. These views will be considered in the following chapters. So I think that's important because a lot of times when we're dealing with theological views, we can often have this exaggerated caricature of each one. Maybe you have a friend that's holds to a more Arminius position of soteriology, and they have this exaggerated view, extreme view of Calvinists. And maybe you have this Calvinist friend, and they have this exaggerated view of your viewpoint, and so forth. And we could do this complementarianism and egalitarianism. We have this exaggerated view to where it even gets heretical. And so what I like that R.C. Sproul is doing here, he's distinguishing, yes, you might have heard of full preterism. But he's showing, no, that believes it was all fulfilled, and there isn't a final coming of Jesus Christ that's literal. And so he's distinguishing that partial preterism does not believe that. Partial preterism believes that there's still a final future coming of Jesus Christ, but that the Olivet Discourse was primarily referring to the destruction of the Jewish temple and Jerusalem in 70 AD, and that much of the judgment pictures that we get and the warnings in Revelation are also referring to 70 AD. So let me come to this here. So he points that most preterists would see Nero as the most likely individual to be the man of lawlessness or the beast in Revelation, or the Antichrist spoken of in 1 John. So here he shows how the cosmological signs described took place within Nero's time period. So this is on page 136. Were there any signs from heaven prior to AD 70? A comet appeared around AD 60 during the reign of Nero. The public speculated that some change in the political scene was imminent. The historian Tacitus wrote, as if Nero were already dethroned, men began to ask who might be his successor. Nero took the comet's threat seriously. Nero took no chances, as another historian, Suetonius, related. All children of the condemned men were banished from Rome and then starved to death or poisoned. Nero survived that comet by several years. Then Halley's comet appeared in AD 66. Not long after this, Nero committed suicide. Historians have linked the appearance of Halley's comet not only with the death of Nero, but with the destruction of Jerusalem 4 years later. And then, let me skip to this page. Here he, now this we already read. Excuse me. So why is Nero a prime candidate for the beast? So here is relating to the mark of the beast. A Hebrew spelling of Nero's name, Neuron Kaiser, pronounced Neron Kaiser, says Gentry, it has been documented by archaeological finds that a 1st century Hebrew spelling of Nero's name provides us with precisely the value of 666. Marcus Jestron's lexicon and Talmud contains this very spelling. A great number of biblical scholars recognize this name as the solution to the problem. Is it not remarkable that this most relevant emperor has a name that fits precisely the required sum? So the math of the cryptogram comes out when you put Nero in the Hebrew spelling, Neron Kaiser, as 666. So let me come back to, there was something else I wanted to read for you guys on why they believe he is the 6th king. And this is a reference to the Revelation 17 and the 6 kings. Okay. We'll see if it pops up. I don't want to waste more time on it. So we also come to the dating of Revelation. The dating of Revelation, I found the page. So 158. Okay, the identity of the 6th king. So in Revelation 17, we have this here. I don't want to read you the whole text. So let me just come, here it is. I'll pick up in the middle. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has yet to come. So this is out of Revelation 17. and then we skip the page over here. And what R.C. Sproul does is he shows a chart showing if you start counting from Julius Caesar and the next Augustus, then Tiberius, then Caligula, Claudius, Nero is number 6. 5 have fallen, 1 is. Okay, and then puts forth a great deal of evidence on why that would make probable sense, correlating again to Revelation 17. So here again, he talks about the dating of Revelation. We're typically understood for Revelation to be dated around the AD 90s, but this fits preterism when we look at it in an earlier dating within the 60s. With respect to partial preterism, Kenneth L. Gentry Jr. has done excellent work in forcing reconsideration of the date when the book of Revelation was written. He is correct in arguing for a date prior to AD 70. Then sweeping revisions must be made in our understanding of this book's content and focus. R.C. concludes the book with this statement: we must take literally the skeptic's critique of the time frame references of New Testament prophecy, and we must answer them convincingly. So my friends, this book took me a while to finish because obviously working and family and all these things, I generally don't have time to sit down and read paper books, and it's not on Audible. Generally, a lot of the books I'm doing chores or driving, listening to Audible. But this was a great read, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And I think R.C. Sproul brings forth a very credible presentation on why partial preterism, at the very least as a hermeneutic, should be partnered with whatever your eschatological position may be millennial-wise. If you're amillennial, partial preterism is compatible with that. If you're postmillennial, obviously partial preterism is compatible with that. And he says even to a degree, historic premillennialism has to at least admit to how the preterist understands the historical cultural context of those passages. So my friends, if you've ever been curious about preterism, if you just love studying eschatology and learning more about the end times, and you want to hear more views than just what's out there in popular culture and media, then by all means, I highly recommend reading